think, for many of us, because we see ourselves as needing to find the relationship. So this is challenging. This is challenging territory. It is a part of our lives as humans that can bring a great deal of joy as well as a great deal of pain. I see myself as a person who can bring about clarity in relationships, who can bring you to a place of understanding first yourself, because that's what we really have to understand in relationships is ourselves, who we are and what we want and what we are going to bring to the table. I'm going to tell you a story about myself growing up, because this illustrates a little bit about that understanding of who we are and what we want in relationships. So when I was in high school, I started dating. I started dating boys. And I got a boyfriend pretty early on in my freshman year. And I developed a problem. And my problem was that I used to throw up on dates. The first time my boyfriend kissed me, it was in the driveway at my parents' house. I threw up on his shoes. Just spontaneous. No warning whatsoever. It just occurred. It was really embarrassing. It was really difficult. The throwing up on dates continued all through high school. My parents were concerned. They thought maybe I had something wrong physically, and so they took me to the doctor and had me looked over. Is everything okay? Do I have a medical concern? I didn't. There was some talk of maybe I needed an anxiety medication. Maybe this was an anxiety problem. My parents were hesitant to put me on any kind of a medication. And so I just lived with it. I lived with it for all of my high school career. I remember vividly running to the ladies' room in heels and a formal. I used to have really long hair. I had hair clear, almost clear to my waist when I was in high school. So I'm running with this long hair and my dress and trying to, throw up but not make a mess on myself as I'm, on a formal date. It happened over and over and over again. And I really questioned myself about, what is the matter with me? Something is wrong. Why is it like this? And my high school boyfriend and I, the one that I dated for most of high school, broke up in my senior year. And he had pressured me for sex. And I was raised in a very conservative religion that taught that, no sex before marriage. And so I had always said no. And when I was no longer under that pressure, the throwing up settled down. I dated other boys through the rest of high school. I did still have some nausea at dances, when kissing, that kind of thing. I still had some, but it wasn't as violent as it was with that first boyfriend. And so I still didn't understand it. I didn't understand myself or why any of this was happening. After high school, my life changed very significantly, and I met, and you'll understand when I say this, that I grew up in a very sheltered place. But I had never known anyone who was gay or lesbian or bi. I had not in a way that I understood it until I was working for a company where my boss was a lesbian. And I was looking to move out of my parents' house. And my boss had an apartment on the back of her house. And so I rented an apartment from my boss and her partner. This was really the first experience I'd ever had with anyone who was not heterosexual. And it didn't take very long for the lights to really turn on for me when I had some direct exposure that, oh, I know the problem. I'm dating the wrong people. I'm gay. And I came out as a lesbian, and I have been, living my authentic self for the last 22 years. And it cleared up the vomiting immediately. I'd never threw up on a date with a girl, never had that problem again. It simply vanished. But I didn't know myself. I didn't understand me when I was in high school and when I was first dating. And so I was doing things that were literally making me sick, and I didn't know it at the time. Now, I use this illustration simply to show you that sometimes if we don't know ourselves in relationships, we may be seeking completely the wrong thing. Now, that does not mean that I think you're gay. That is not the point at all. The point is simply that if you don't know yourself and you don't really understand why you're doing what you're doing and why it isn't working, continuing the same cycle, continuing that same pattern will bring you the same result until you understand yourself. So I want to do an exercise that will help to illustrate this. So if you can, get out a piece of paper and a pen. You can do this in your email, on your phone, or anywhere. I just need you to be able to document something. So I want you to think about your dating and relationship experience, starting back whenever you were, whatever age you were when you started dating. And I want you to write down the names of everyone that you have dated, had a long-term relationship with, a marriage, however, whatever kinds of relationships you've had. Please write all of those down. I'm going to give you just a minute to do that. While you do that, I'm going to share with you my screen, which is just the view of my book, which is coming out on December 13th. This is Relationships for Spiritual People. And it is on sale on Kindle right now for 99 cents for the pre-order. So I wanted to share that with you while you write down your relationships. So I'm just going to give you a minute to write all those down. Just write the names, something that will prompt you so that you remember something about that relationship, because we're going to use that here in a minute. I would love it if you would use the chat function here in Zoom. I've opened it up on my screen. You can open it up on yours as well. There's just a little bubble, it says chat, and there's a little bubble. If you click on it, it opens the chat function. Once it's open, then you can type in there, and I would love it. In a few minutes, we're going to develop some words, and when we develop those words, I would like for you to share them with me, because they're really important. I'm going to grab something over here that will help me with an example of this. So once you have all of your names written down, I want you to go through and put a star next to each name where that relationship ended badly for you. And you can determine what that means by badly, if the relationship broke up in some way, or even if it's a relationship that you're in now that you're questioning, you could put a star next to that relationship as well. So I'll give you a minute to star your relationships. Okay. Now that you have starred those relationships, the ones that ended badly, I want you to choose a word that identifies how that relationship ended. So that word could be something like betrayal. It could be neglect. It could be abuse. It could be abandonment. It could be loss. It could have been a death, of course. It could be anything that you see as the way that that relationship ended. So just choose a single word that represents the way that that relationship ended for you. And when you have your words, if you have access to the chat in Zoom, I would love it if you would put your words in there. If not, I will just be sharing some with you that other people have shared with me already. But I think it's helpful to think through your relationships and how they may have ended, or how they may have harmed you in some way. And so, okay, so we have emotional abuse, we have traumatic, we have abandonment. Very good. I want you to look at your list, and I want you to look for a pattern. Is there a pattern in that list? Does emotional abuse occur more than once? Have you had more than one relationship where there was emotional abuse? Have you had more than one relationship where there was trauma or abandonment or betrayal? Have you had more than one relationship where there was infidelity? whether it was on your part or the other person's part. There's no judgment about that at this point. It's simply an awareness on your part, because what we're looking for here is a pattern. Oh, okay, so we've got alcohol abuse. Good. That's another one. So we'll give you just another minute to come together with those. If you have any more, please share them in the chat. Neglect, yeah. Some relationships just sort of end in apathy. Have you ever had a relationship that ended just because it just sort of drifted away? The other person never really said, I don't want to be with you anymore. They just sort of stopped showing up in your life. Got infidelity. Good, okay. If you can, in the chat, note to me if you're sharing something that is repeating in your life. Share a pattern that repeats and tell me it's repeating. Oh, the phenomenon of ghosting. Yes. So ghosting is what I refer to as apathy. So just sort of disappearing. Somebody that starts, you start a relationship with someone and then they disappear into your life, away from your life. Good. So we're seeing some good ones here. This is the beginning. This is the first step to identifying your pattern. In order to change the way that things are happening in a relationship, we have to first identify the pattern that is occurring. What is it? Why is it happening? And we get to the why later, but first we have to determine what is the pattern that repeats. Now, take this a little step further. Go back to your childhood. Identify your parents or whoever raised you and their relationship to one another, or their relationships if they had multiple relationships. How did their relationships work out? Did they have relationships that ended? And if so, in what way did they end? So use your skill here to identify those words again. That are the words that identify, the kinds of patterns that you might have been in. Let's use the ones that you have also witnessed. So think about the people who raised you and other significant adult relationships in your life. How did those relationships end? And do you see a pattern there at all? So please feel free to share with me in the chat if you do. But one thing that I'm finding with a lot of people is that if you go back to the people who raised you, the adults that you spent time with, my parents stayed together miserably and fought all the time. Okay, so this was a relationship that didn't end, but that still was most definitely damaging and would be considered a negative relationship. So there's the staying with hatred. We've all seen that. People who stay together in misery. And have you repeated that pattern? I want you to look at your parents' relationship or whoever raised you in that relationship and compare it to your relationships. Have you repeated any of those same relationships? My parents were happy and stayed together, still together to this day. Very good. So Michelle, for you, that is an example relationship. So we have all relationships are examples, but this is a good example. My parents were the same. My parents stayed together. They were very happy up until their deaths. They passed away 18 months apart. So I think that it's really important for you to identify relationships that were an example that you might be repeating in a negative way, or relationships that are positive that you can learn from. I use my parents' relationship as an example for me a lot. When I think about my own relationship, I think about what would they have done? How would they have handled things? Because it helps me to have a positive example. We all have those negative examples as well. And unfortunately, the negative examples, because they create trauma for us, are the things that we have a tendency to repeat. Because I know if you're here today participating in this seminar, that you have a problem with relationships. You wouldn't be here if you didn't. You see yourself as having a struggle. So if you can identify, what do you see as the struggle that you have with relationships, please share that word in the chat. And if it matches up with one of these things you've already shared, it probably does, But what do you see as your problem? Are you a person who can't seem to find a relationship at all? Are you a person who's been in multiple relationships that don't work out? Or are you one of those people who's just completely given up on relationships and you're not doing it anymore? You've signed off. I'm going to give you a second to think about that and go ahead and share that in the chat as well. And for those listening and not participating in the chat, I want to encourage you to do these steps yourself. It's really important to identify where you're at. We have to begin at the beginning. There are a lot of different ways to look at relationships, but I think that one of the problems that we have, especially in the spiritual community, is that we don't look at the trauma part of it. And that is where a lot of our struggle comes from. Okay. I'm beginning to wonder if relationships are worth all the effort. Yes, I hear that from people regularly. Particularly, so that makes me think, Adara, that you might be a person who puts in more work in relationships than the other person does. And you can answer me. But you sound to me like a person, and I've worked with many people with this challenge. Yes, she says that's true. Okay. Where you feel like you get into a relationship where you're doing all the work and the other person doesn't really put in any effort. I want you to consider, why is it that those people are coming into your life? This is the step that we have to take to start to identify. And this is what I do with my clients, is we take this work that we've just done and we put it through a bunch of different filters to determine, why is it that you're attracting people into your life that put more into a relationship than you put into a relationship? That's a really important question that we have to answer. Let's see. Raven says, I recognized that my marriage was as miserable as my parents' marriage after they came for dinner one night, and thus I saw the writing on the wall. I told myself that very night that I got to get out of this while I still can. Yes, very good. So you saw the pattern. You saw the pattern that you were repeating your parents' pattern. There are a lot of people on this planet that are repeating their parents' pattern. That is a very common struggle, and one that it is possible to get through. I want you to know that, because if you feel like Adara does, you feel like it doesn't matter. This is so much challenge and struggle, and all I do is work harder than the other person, and I don't get enough out of it. Well, I know that it feels that way. I understand that it does. I absolutely believe that everybody can be in a happy relationship. But if you are in a cycle, in a pattern where you repeat the same thing over and over again, you're just having the same relationship with a different person. Do you ever feel like you're in the same relationship with someone, only they just have a different face from the last person you were with? That's what I'm talking about in repeating a negative pattern. Michelle says, I also noticed I've been with narcissists. I am an empath and a recovering alcoholic as well. I fall for toxic men. Yeah. Okay. So, Michelle, you know your pattern, which is really important. That's the beginning, is to understand your pattern. Now, with my clients, because this today is 45 minutes and we're going to talk through some things that I know are going to be very helpful for you, but this is a process that takes longer than 45 minutes to solve, as I'm sure we all understand. But we have to take that knowledge that you have a pattern that you repeat, and we have to pass it through a bunch of different filters. So we have to look at it through your emotional filter and your thought filter and your empathy filter and the filter of your energy body. And we have to figure out, why is it that you are attracted to and that you attract into your life toxic men? What is it? What's happening that is making that repeat over and over again? It is entirely possible to break that pattern. I have seen it happen many times. I share in my book a bunch of different stories about the experiences that I've had with people over the years who have broken a pattern in relationships and how I've helped them to do that. Because that's what I do as a healer and as a spiritual relationship coach. That's really my job. It is to help you to break the pattern. We first identify it, And then we understand where it is coming from, and then we break it. It's so possible. Sometimes it sounds scary. And I know at first people are like, yeah, I've tried everything. I've read all the books. I've taken all the seminars. I've done all the work. I know that you feel like you have. And that's okay. I want to honor the work that you have done because it has brought you to this point. It has brought you to listening to this seminar today. There's another step that we have to take. And that's what I would love to do with all of you. It is the work that I do every day. It is the work that brings me joy, honestly, because I see people walk away from this pattern and change the way that they look at themselves and the world and change the people that come into their lives. Raven says, yes, husband 1, 2, and 3 were all similar versions of my father. Yeah, exactly, Raven. You were repeating your parents' pattern. We've been there. Most of us have been there, right? It's possible to break that pattern. Let's see. I want to. So a big part of it is trauma. We repeat trauma until we resolve it. It is a known fact in relationships. It is something that in the trauma world, if you work in trauma, which I have had a lot of experience working in trauma, if you work in the trauma world, you know that people have a tendency to repeat the pattern of the traumatic event until it is resolved in one way or another. It is why, for example, young women who may, for example, are raped on a date or experience some kind of sexual assault may actually get back into situations where it occurs over and over and over again. It is not in any way to blame them. It is not that at all. It is simply that they are playing out the situation multiple times to try to solve it. We're trying to solve it by living it again. You may not be consciously aware of that at all, and I want to be really clear about that. It is not a conscious choice to be repeating a pattern like that. It is, however, an unconscious way of yourself trying to solve the problem, trying to get out of the pain, trying to resolve the trauma. That's where I come in. I'm a trauma expert. I've been working in trauma for 20 years. I have worked with trauma from lots of different angles as a social worker in domestic violence and sexual assault. And what I found was that there are limitations to the mainstream way of looking at trauma. There are some good therapies out there. There are some great things happening, but there are some limitations. And as a healer, I have found that there is a part of this that needs to be addressed. And that part of it is in the energy body. We have to look at the way that the pattern is repeating in your energy, because that is where the repeating the same experience over and over again is happening. It's not in your conscious mind. I mean, think about it for a minute. Did you, for example, Raven, intend to get into a relationship where you had marriages with people similar to your father 3 times? No, of course you didn't. You didn't intend that at all. In your mind, you were trying to break your pattern. But because of the nature of trauma and the way that it sits in the energy body, you repeated the same pattern because you're trying to break the pattern. She says, I have not dated since my divorce 8 years ago. Right. Here's another way of trying to break the pattern. We avoid it altogether. We simply stay away from relationships. In the short term, it's effective. However, you're here, which tells me that you don't actually want to be alone, that you don't actually want to not have a relationship for the rest of your life, but it is your way of protecting yourself for now. She says, hell no. She did not mean to get into 3 marriages where she was repeating her parents' relationship and marrying her dad. No one does. None of us do. But we don't understand this piece of it. We don't understand this part about trauma and about how it repeating over and over again to help us to resolve the issue gets us into the same kinds of experiences over and over again. Michelle, you said that you fall for toxic men. Well, I'm going to tell you that you're probably trying to resolve that problem from a trauma perspective. So you get into the same kinds of relationships to make it different this time. The problem is that if you get into a relationship with the same kind of person, it will not be different. It will always be the same. You will just repeat the pattern over and over again. Do you guys know the movie Groundhog's Day? It's an older movie with Bill Murray. You probably do. But he wakes up on Groundhog's Day every day for a long period of time. Every day it's Groundhog's Day, and he repeats the same day over and over again. And the whole movie is about trying to break the pattern to get out. It is what a lot of us do in relationships because of that trauma element. But there is work that can be done to solve the trauma on the energy plane, in your energy body, in your emotional body, and your thinking body, because they are all connected to one another. We have to break that pattern in all of those areas. It sounds hard. It's not hard. What you need is you need a guide to get yourself through it. It's not something that any of us can resolve on our own in reality. It just isn't. And you've probably been through, I bet many of you have been to counseling. I bet many of you have read relationship books and been to other relationship seminars. I'm going to guess that a lot of you have already done those things. And if you have, good for you. You've made strides. Even if you haven't solved the problem completely, there have been pieces of those things that you have done that have assisted you. We now just need to get you up over the hump, which is entirely possible to do. That's what I do. That is exactly what I do. It is work that I love because I see change happen so quickly in people when we add this piece, when we understand that trauma repeats itself in the energy body until it is resolved. That's the bottom line. That's the bottom line. And when it is resolved, you find that you think about yourself differently. And when you think about yourself differently, you feel differently about yourself. The energy that you project out into the world changes, and the people that you attract to yourself change. They aren't the same people. Suddenly, you're not dating your dad over and over again. Suddenly, you're not dating toxic men anymore. Suddenly, it's a different group of people who come your way. And one of the things that happens at this stage is that you have to allow it to happen, because it might feel really strange to you. It might feel like, well, this is completely different than anything I have ever done. I don't want this part of it. Like, I feel out of my element. This is when sometimes people return to their old pattern. And so there are a lot of ways that we can work through those obstacles together as far as resolving that fear of returning to the same place, or that fear of change, that fear of, well, I don't know how to be in a relationship with someone who's different. Well, actually, you really do, because at this point, you will be different as well. You will not be the same person, and you will not be attracting the same person, if that makes sense. It's so important to understand this part of yourself. We make connections to traumatic experiences. We make connections to people and experiences. We have connections to the energy of things that have happened to us before. It's really important that we break those connections in order to move forward, and that we have to first understand that they even exist, because a lot of us don't. The energy body is a huge part of my work. I am a physical empath and aura reader, so I read people's energy bodies. I've been doing it for 20 years. I've read thousands and thousands of people's energy bodies. And one thing that I know is that we're all a little bit different. We have to identify who we are on that plane and then understand that. We have to understand how we have remained connected to the things that have happened to us in the past, and then we need help to disconnect from those things. My personal theory as a healer is that some of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress come from being connected on an energy plane to something that has happened to us in the past. I see it like wearing a balloon on a string on your wrist. This is what trauma is. It's like having a balloon tied to a string, tied to your wrist. So have you ever had a balloon on your wrist before? You can't ever not see it. It's with you everywhere you go. It's in your periphery. It's with you in your daily life all the time. Now, this is a huge problem because if this is trauma, it feels like that traumatic experience or that group of traumatic experiences is with you wherever you go all day, every day. It never just becomes a part of your past. It is a part of your present all the time. And so we have to untie the string. We have to release the balloon in order to allow you to be free from that trauma. And when you are, you think about the world differently. You think about yourself differently. You see other people differently when you aren't looking at it through that lens of trauma. That is truly the work that I do with my clients. Michelle says that makes a lot of sense. Get out of my comfort zone because I am not used to it. Isn't working too well for me. Yeah, and it's hard. I mean, in general, humans are not big fans of change. We aren't. One of the reasons we're not big fans of change is because our egos are afraid of change. If you got up this morning and you had breakfast and you went to work and you did whatever you would normally do on a regular day and you survived, then your ego thinks that that was the right thing to do. You need to repeat that pattern every single day for the rest of your life. If you got up and sat on the couch and watched Netflix all day, well, you lived. So your ego wants you to do that for the rest of your life because you survived. Your ego's job is to keep you alive. And so when you do something new, have you ever had that feeling like, oh my God, I might die. This might kill me, doing something new, doing something I've never done before? That's your ego talking. That's what makes change so hard, is because your ego thinks that something new could be the end of you, even though it's most definitely not something that could kill you, but it could be something that might. That's all that it takes. And so you have to learn to understand and overcome that ego. And that is another area that I work on with my clients, of just moving forward in spite of. Taking a step forward, trying something new, getting out of your comfort zone, in spite of that sense of, I might die. Have you ever had that feeling? I'm sure you have. We all have had a silly feeling that this experience or that experience might actually kill me, even though in reality that could never be the case. Let's see, I want to check the chat. Raven says, I jokingly say, I'm not sure I'll know how to relate to a guy that isn't dysfunctional, but it's true. Yeah, it is true. It is true. If you haven't resolved your trauma history, you might not know how to relate to somebody who doesn't also have a history like that. Michelle says, I feel I don't deserve a man who has got it together. Yeah, okay. So what if you do, Michelle? What if you get it together and then you deserve that guy? What if you solve your issue first? That really is the bottom line. That really is the takeaway for today, is that your relationship problems begin with you. They have to be resolved inside of yourself first before you can present yourself to the world and seek someone different. I've seen amazing transformations with my clients. People who couldn't look me in the eye when I first started working with them. I do sessions like we're doing right now on Zoom, only they're on video as well. And so we're, face to face on video when we work together. And I've had clients who can't look me in the eye. They struggle that much with their self-esteem and feeling good about themselves, and they can't look me right in the eye. And over time, they look me in the eye, and then they smile, and then they have a good day. And then they feel happy about something. And then someone who normally would never talk to them makes eye contact with them, speaks to them, asks how their day is. And they start to notice that what they're putting out in the world about who they are is shifting. And as that shifts, so does what you attract back into your life. These things are possible. There is a solution to your relationship challenge. I know it. I have no doubt. There are probably a lot of solutions out there. I have one. I have a solution. It's based on my book. And it is work that I am doing with people now. You don't have to wait for my book. If you would like to know more about that, here at the end of this session, I will give you a way to reach out to me if you would like to know more about that. I also would invite you to get my book because the steps are there. What happens with people when they work with me is we do the steps together. And that can help a whole lot because I'm a healer. And so I have the added bonus of being able to see your trauma and where it affects you and how it's affecting your relationships and helping you to heal that. Raven says, I've noticed that I now avoid emotions in relationships. I seriously wonder if I can ever have intimacy again. Okay. And that's okay to be in that place. But if it isn't where you want to be, Raven, if that is not what you want out of your life, it's possible to change it. It takes some work. It takes some recognition that that problem is coming directly from you and that it can be solved, but it really can be. And I respect everyone's choice about what you do with relationships. Some people really do say, I'm done with relationships. I'm never doing this again. And I respect that. If that's truly you and you don't want to move forward in relationships, please don't feel like you have to. We live in a society that teaches us that we have to be with someone else, and if we're not, that we don't have the same worth as people who are in relationships. And that is not true. That's destructive, and it's unkind, and it isn't true. You can be happy on your own. But if you don't want that, if you want to be with someone else, you can do that too. There are solutions out there for you. I think that we have to really begin to respect everyone's choices about what kind of comfort level they have with relationships. I'm working with people with all different kinds of levels of comfort with relationships. Some people that I work with are very happy to be in a relationship in which they don't live in the same house and feel like maybe that might not ever change, that they might not ever actually want to live with another human being again. They can have time with a person and then have their own space. I think that's entirely legitimate. I work with people who have relationships that are completely by distance. They have someone in their life who is a support to them, who they feel connected to, but they don't actually meet physically hardly ever, or maybe only a few times a year. That's okay too. And then, of course, I work with people who want to have an intimate relationship again, who want to live with someone again, who want to share their life with someone, and that's okay as well. It doesn't matter what you want. It's just important for you to know what that is and to validate it and to seek it out. Whatever it is, it's okay for you to want it. Idara says, I'm interested in coming into more clarity about whether I am well suited for relationships in general. I think that's a great place to start, Idara, really. Am I really a good fit for relationships? Maybe you are, maybe you're not. Maybe it is just a certain kind of person that is the right person for you. That's what I find with people. Over time, what happens is they get much more specific about who they want in their life. We've all been there where you just don't want to be alone, and so you're just with someone, right? That's a common thing that happens in relationships. And those relationships always fail because you're not with that person because you want that person. You're with that person because you need a relationship. There's a big difference in relationships between need and want. This is an area that I want you to be aware of. This is an area that it's important to work on. Is if you want a relationship, that's a great thing. Needing one is a problem because that's when you get into things that aren't healthy for you. So we start with being healthy ourselves, understanding what we want, understanding who we are and where we've come from and why we are in the place we're in, which is exactly where we should be. I truly believe that whatever you've been through in relationships, it has taught you a great deal about who you are. It has made you the person that you are today in a good way. Now, if you want that to change, it can. Raven says, being adopted and not having the close mother-infant bonding, I think that laid the groundwork for the mess of intimacy issues. Is that a factor? Oh, I would say 100% it is. That was your very first relationship that failed you. It makes it very likely that you have a long history of difficulty connecting in intimacy with people on various levels of relationships. Is it healable? Yeah, it absolutely is. But yeah, do I think that's probably the root of your issue? I will bet it is. Idara says, want versus need. Yes, I am so tired. Right. So Idara, there's nothing wrong with not wanting anything. But if you feel like in the future you may, or if you feel like there is a particular kind of relationship that you would want, then there are steps that you can take to do that. So we're almost out of time. I just want to share one last thing with you, and that is, if you want to get in touch with me, if you want to take what we've learned today and take it further, we can. There are ways to do that. So I'm going to share this screen with you so that you can see it. And so if you want to get in touch with me, you can email me. This is my email address. It's findyourheartlight@gmail.com. It might sound familiar because it's part of the subtitle of my book. It is a key element of the work that I do, finding your heart light, first yours, and then maybe another one out in the world that matches yours, because we do have that. We have our heart lights out there. But please feel free to email me at findyourheartlight@gmail.com if you would like to know more, if you would like to get in touch with me and know how to take this further. I just want to say thank you, all of you, for joining me today. It has been a joy to be here with you and to talk through this with you. I love working with people on relationships because I see the value in all of you as people. And I know that human need that we have to be with someone else. I understand how important it is and how much it combats that sense of loneliness that some of us experience. And I want to help as many people as I can to do just that, to find their heart light. So thank you so much for joining me today. I will send out the video, a copy of this video, so that you can watch it again. And remember, if you want to get in touch with me, just email me at findyourheartlight@gmail.com. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.